We're going to be taking you through the Chronomancer Echoes of Time build for Path of Exile 2's Sorceress class. Think like stopping time, rewinding your actions, and just generally turning the battlefield into your personal time-bending playground. Sounds fun, right?
It really does capture that feeling of power fantasy you get in games like this. This guide we're diving into today is all about making the most of the Chronomancer's unique mechanics. Not just the what of the skills, but the how to use them effectively.
Okay, so for anyone who hasn't delved into Path of Exile 2 yet, ascendancies, basically how your character specializes. In this case, we're talking about a sorceress who ascends into a chronomancer, a master of time magic. And the guide highlights 3 key nodes that are core to this build.
Right. These nodes on the passive skill tree really define how this Chronomancer build works. You have Time Freeze, which, as you might guess, lets you briefly stop time. Then there's Temporal Rift, which is almost like a rewind button, taking you back to a previous position, and restoring some health and mana. And finally, there's Time Snap, which resets the cooldowns on your skills, enabling some crazy combos.
So stopping time sounds incredible, but how do you actually use that strategically in a fight? I'm picturing just lining up the perfect shot on a boss, or maybe escaping a bad situation.
You're on the right track. Time Freeze is all about setting up those ideal moments, whether it's ensuring every projectile from your spell hits a frozen target, or giving yourself a breather to reposition. The guide focuses on how this combines with other skills for maximum impact, rather than just using it defensively.
Got it. And Temporal Rift sounds like a fantastic safety net, especially for a spellcaster who might be a bit squishy on the battlefield.
Absolutely. It changes the way you can approach fights. You can play more aggressively, knowing you have that rewind option if things go south. But it also feeds into the resource management aspect of the build, especially when paired with Sigil of Power, which is one of the core spells highlighted.
Let's talk about those spells then. This guide focuses on a few specific ones that really work well with the Chronomancer's time-bending abilities, right?
Exactly. You've got Orb of Storms, which is this stationary orb that just hurls lightning at enemies. Now imagine casting a few of those, rewinding with Temporal Rift to get your mana back, and then using Time Snap to immediately cast them all again. That's just one example of how this build synergizes.
Okay, I see where this is going. It's about manipulating those cooldowns and resources to create these insane bursts of damage. What are some of the other spells that fit into this?
There's Eye of Winter, a spiraling cold projectile that's particularly devastating when paired with Time Freeze. Imagine freezing a group of enemies, then watching those projectiles just shred them as they're helplessly frozen. Visually, it's pretty spectacular.
And this build also uses curses to weaken enemies, right?
Absolutely. Curses like flammability or make your spells hit even harder. It's another layer of strategy, because you're not just blasting away, you're setting up those blasts for maximum effectiveness.
So you've got these core spells, the time manipulation abilities, and then there are also support gems that modify how those spells work, right? What are some of the standouts there?
Well, one that's practically essential for this build is Spell Echo, which lets you cast spells multiple times in quick succession. Think of it as turbocharging your Orb of Storms or Eye of Winter.
Makes sense. It seems like stacking those orbs and projectiles would be a key part of the strategy here.
Exactly. And then there's Controlled Destruction, which increases your spell damage. But at the cost of increased mana cost, it's a trade-off. But with a build that focuses on mana regeneration and cooldown resets, it becomes a very powerful option.
So it's about finding that right balance, right? Maximizing your damage output while making sure you can sustain it. What about increased area of effect? Is that something the guide recommends?
It is. Remember, this Chronomancer build is all about creating these overlapping zones of destruction. Increased area of effect helps you cover more ground with your spells, turning a single explosion into a wide-scale massacre.
So we're talking about maximizing damage, controlling the battlefield with time manipulation, and all these cool spells. But I imagine gear plays a big role in making this all work too, right?
You bet it does. The guide specifically calls out a couple of unique items that really amplify this Chronomancer build. One is the Lifespring wand. Now imagine casting spells and actually gaining life back with each cast.
Okay, that sounds like a must-have, especially for a spellcaster who relies on constantly throwing out those spells. It solves the survivability issue we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's not just about raw damage, but also being able to withstand the hits while you're setting up those devastating combos. And the Lifespring wand really helps with that, especially in the early stages of the game, when you might not have a ton of mana regeneration yet.
So you're essentially a spell-slinging vampire, staying alive through the sheer force of your magic. I like it. What about the other unique item mentioned in the guide?
That would be the Endless Night Staff. Now remember how we talked about Eye of Winter and its chilling effect? Well, this staff boosts your cold damage significantly, making those frozen explosions even more potent.
So it's not just about more damage, but also about making those freezes more reliable. That's a great example of how itemization can create these subtle synergies within a build.
Right. It feeds back into that idea of control. You're not just hoping to freeze enemies. You're creating a situation where it's almost guaranteed, which then allows you to really capitalize on time freeze and all those stacked projectiles.
This all sounds incredibly powerful, but I know that in Path of Exile too, your character's growth is just as important as the gear you find. How does this build handle leveling and those all-important attribute choices?
Well, as you might expect for a spellcaster, intelligence is your primary attribute here. It drives everything, your spell damage, mana pool, and mana regeneration. So as you're leveling up, you're going to want to prioritize gear and passive skills that boost those intelligence-related stats.
Makes sense. So you're building that foundation of raw arcane power first and foremost. What about dexterity? I know some spellcasters need a bit of that for certain support gems.
You'll need some, but it's not the primary focus. Dexterity might be necessary to equip certain support gems, but the guide emphasizes that you shouldn't go overboard. The real power of this build lies in maximizing your intelligence, spell damage, and mana sustain.
So it's all about finding those efficient paths through the passive skill tree, getting the most bang for your attribute point buck. What does the guide say about the actual playstyle of this Chronomancer build? It's got to be more than just spamming spells, right?
Oh, it's definitely more than that.
Yeah.
The guide lays out a 4-phase approach, and it's all about mastering the rhythm of time manipulation. It's almost like a dance, where each step sets up the next for maximum impact.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk me through those phases, like I'm about to step onto the dance floor of destruction.
Phase 1 is all about preparation. You're positioning yourself strategically, precasting those orbs of storms, maybe dropping a sigil of power, and getting those Eye of Winter projectiles ready to go. It's about creating the conditions for an explosive combo.
So you're laying the groundwork, setting the stage for that big moment. What's next?
Phase 2 is amplification. This is where those curses come into play. You're weakening enemies with flammability, conductivity, or whatever curse makes sense for the situation. It's about ensuring that when your spells hit, they hit hard.
Okay, so you've set the stage, you've weakened the enemies. What's the big finale?
Phase 3 is execution. This is where time freeze activates. Everything goes into slow motion. And you unleash the full fury of those precast spells. Those orbs are zapping, the projectiles are swirling, and ideally your enemies are frozen solid, unable to do anything but take the punishment.
I can practically see it now. Raining down arcane destruction upon a helpless, frozen foe. Epic. But it can't be over yet, right? There's got to be more to this time-bending dance.
You're right, there is. Phase 4 is all about resetting and repeating. This is where Temporal Rift and Time Snap shine. You rewind, refresh your cooldowns and mana, and then it's back to Phase 1, setting up the next wave of destruction.
It's like a perpetual motion machine of devastation. I love it. This guide has given us a great breakdown of how this build works. But is there anything else aspiring Chronomancers should keep in mind?
Well, I think one of the most important takeaways here is the importance of experimentation. The guide offers a solid framework, but it's not meant to be a rigid set of rules. Path of Exile 2 is all about finding what works best for your playstyle and the challenges you face.
So it sounds like there's a lot of room for customization, even within this specific Chronomancer build. What kind of things would you encourage players to experiment with?
Well, think about those support gems we talked about. The guide recommends some, but there are others that might fit your playstyle better. Maybe you want more area of effect, or perhaps you're willing to sacrifice some damage for increased cast speed. It's all about finding those synergies and making the build truly yours.
And I imagine the passive skill tree offers a lot of choices as well.
Absolutely. You can really fine-tune your character by focusing on specific areas of the tree. Do you want more survivability, more damage, more mana regeneration? The tree is a complex web of choices, and that's where the real depth of Path of Exile 2 comes in.
It sounds like the possibilities are almost endless, even when starting with a specific build like this one. What's the best way for someone to approach that experimentation? Is it just trial and error, or are there resources out there to help players find those optimal paths?
Well, trial and error is definitely part of the fun, and I'd encourage everyone to just jump in and try things out. But there's a great community of Path of Exile 2 players out there who are constantly sharing their knowledge and discoveries, Online forums, build guides, and even streaming platforms are fantastic resources for getting ideas and seeing how other players are approaching the game.
It's great that the community is so active and helpful. It really adds to the longevity of a game like this, knowing that there are always new things to learn and new ways to play.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that makes this Chronomancer build so appealing. It's not just a cookie-cutter build that you follow blindly, it's a starting point, a foundation upon which you can build your own unique playstyle and master the art of time manipulation in a way that truly resonates with you.
It's been a fascinating deep dive into the world of the Chronomancer, exploring the interplay between time manipulation, powerful spells, and strategic itemization. It's clear that this build offers a lot of depth and flexibility, even for those who are new to Path of Exile 2.
I completely agree. It's a build that rewards careful planning and execution, but it also allows for improvisation and adaptation on the fly.
And for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to try out the Chronomancer, remember what we discussed today. Don't be afraid to experiment. Find those hidden synergies, and embrace the challenge of mastering time itself.
It's a journey worth taking, and who knows, maybe we'll see you out there on the battlefield, bending time to your will, and leaving a trail of frozen enemies in your wake.
Until next time, this is The Deep Dive signing off.